share some. Oh, got it. So you may have some opportunities to interact and engage with some of the learning. I don't have the power to mute you, so if you do come online, if you could go ahead and mute yourself at some point, that would be great as well. So in the chat field, I'll post it again, are the materials for this session. I think. Let's try that again. In the chat field, I'll post a link to the materials for this session. And those materials will be referencing a note taker as well as the presentation itself. So if at some point you want to retrieve this to share with other colleagues, you're welcome to do so. And then similarly, as we're going through content, if there's things that you want to access, links, etc., or take notes, you're welcome to do so. So before introducing specifically this content and the objectives and who I am, I do want to start with this guy. And thumbs up or show of hands if you are familiar with who David Coleman is. All right, I got one thumbs up. That's great. So if you don't know David Coleman, he was the lead author of the ELA standards. He also currently is the president of the College Board. And so if you're unfamiliar with the College Board, they are AP, so our advanced placement student, or the SAT, they also are Springboard. So they've articulated a whole host of resources around English language arts, but with an emphasis on how can we bridge the Common Core to the standards themselves. And so what I want to share with you as just sort of a launch for this content is a clip of David Coleman sort of breaking down the standards for some stakeholders. And as we watch, you're going to hear Coleman right here in our focus question. He's going to talk about the advantages of the arts. And so aside from what Coleman shares, I'm curious what other advantages you've noticed about working with the arts with your students. So we're going to start with Coleman, who will launch us into our content. We'll debrief it, and then we'll go ahead and have a conversation. All right. And somebody said they can't get the camera to work, which is fine. And hit stop share, and we're going to share the video. All right, does everybody see David Coleman here on the left? All right, and everything, like, we're picking up a clip. It's a little bit awkward and a little bit disjointed, so we're picking up in the middle. If you're unfamiliar with that woman right there, that's Carol Jago from NCTE. This is Len Munson. And again, we're just going to listen to Coleman describe the value of the arts, and you're going to think about for yourself, what are the other advantages of working with the arts, and then we'll debrief that.
Lynn, when you say only the nuts and bolts of reading are being done today, or when we call these things electives, we misspeak. That is, what the research shows us is there is no way to learn how to read without the building of dense knowledge in early grades, which crucially drives vocabulary that is the heart of reading. That is, there is no such thing as doing the nuts and bolts of reading in kindergarten through 5th grade without coherently developing knowledge in science and history and the arts, period. It is false. It is a fiction. And that is why NAEP scores in early grades can improve slightly, but collapse as students grow older. Because it is the deep foundation in rich knowledge and vocabulary depth that allows you to access more complex text. I here stand on the shoulders of giants in this field, not my own research. People like E.D. Hirsch, people like David Pearson, people like a broad set of reading scientists who have long known the importance of vocabulary and knowledge in predicting later achievement. What is a catastrophe is that the seeming focus on reading in early grades was mirrored by a focus on reading only stories, and often much worse than stories, not necessarily of a high quality, to be clear. But that total focus on reading only stories in K-5 and then expanding the literacy block to meet reading standards had the disastrous, catastrophic effect of crowding out history, the arts, and social science in the elementary school, which you see so clearly. But talk about cutting your nose to spite your face. I want to be very clear. We were not expanding reading time. We were devastating reading time by cutting off the knowledge that is the foundation of reading itself, period. So let's not get confused here that we're adding back nice things that are an addendum to literacy. We are adding the cornerstones of literacy, which are the foundations of knowledge that make the possibility of literacy happen. A word about the arts. The day after writing the standards, which was a rather exhausting time, you might imagine. Sue Weddle, who's one of the women I most admire, a public servant I most admire, who is the head of curriculum in Massachusetts, gathered together 40 arts teachers from around the states to talk about the Common Core's implications for the arts. And we spent 3 days with them because we thought it was so critical to get this right. And I'll tell you what we discovered, which is very interesting. The wrong answer for the role of arts and literacy is to say when you're reading and writing about the arts, you're doing literacy. This is the cheap answer, where the arts teacher becomes the handmaiden of the literature environment or the literacy environment. Much more interesting is to consider, what do the arts do that literacy teachers could learn from? What do the arts tend to be better at than the literacy profession? I will suggest to you two things. No great artist looks at a piece of work once and considers it done. Every artist loves observation, rigorous observation and repeated observation. And at the core of these standards, as all of you in this room know, is more demanding text that will require rereading and careful observation. Secondly, the arts have the great advantage of a single score and multiple interpretations. So for example, when reading Shakespeare, one can see several examples of how others have interpreted this text. And there's no greater masterclass on the role of evidence and interpretation than a single score of music interpreted several ways, or a single. There are advantages the arts have to offer insight, and I think we must command and take advantage of those. I think beginning in elementary.
All right, we're going to go ahead and stop there. And so you heard Coleman, so I think it's relevant insofar as this is the person who is the chief architect of the ELA Common Core K standards, which we have rebranded as the Nevada Academic Content Standards. And he talks about the advantages of the arts and the importance of them. And what my question was, what other things have you noticed about arts being advantageous to your students? This is awkward because there's only 3 of you here. So somebody's gonna have to say something.
I'll say something. Sorry, I have to leave the meeting to get the camera to work, so I'll just do that later. I really think that student engagement is really increased when they know they get to be creative at the same time that they are learning something.
That's great. And that will feed into another piece of content in just a moment. So there's the advantage of just student engagement. And we know that behavior and anxiety are amped up in our buildings right now. So this is one way that we can engage our students.
I think also it's tapping into some interests of certain students that might not always be evident at school. So you have your artists or your student that loves to sing and make songs, that loves to draw. So really pulling in their interests will help them just in the long run across all areas.
That was nicely stated. And then David, I saw you put in the chat field, it's another way for students to be successful and to respond to the instruction. And I think that's totally on point, which is the idea of in addition to, not instead of, but it's another sort of tool for our toolkit in terms of increasing engagement, which was alluded to earlier, and then tapping into not learning styles, but learning preferences. We have preferences for different pieces of content, and this is one way of or another avenue to get there. So,
I wanted to add something else. Like I've noticed for our EL students and students, because we have so many very, very, very low students right now. I teach 2nd grade, giving them another avenue to show what knowledge they have learned is really helping. So orally, or they can draw a picture, or just show me in some way that, you know, what you've learned from whatever we're learning about. And it does give them an opportunity to at least show you that they are paying attention. They've learned something. They may not be able to do it writing or just reading, but it gives them another outlet to be successful.
That's perfect, Maria. And again, this is it does dovetail right into the content that we're going to explore. So I do want to get to our objectives, and then again, we'll unpack some of the things that we're going to do in order to maximize engagement and get to the art out standards for our students. So my goal for this session, and by the 10:15, to give you a little bit more of an understanding of the standards themselves. We don't explore the visual art standards that much with our colleagues in our buildings. So we'll unpack those. We'll look at a few strategies, and then we're going to learn about a resource called Doodles Academy, in which all of the things that you just mentioned, it's all vehicle to get there. And it's a free resource after registration that you can use. So my suspicion, we can just do a thumbs up, thumbs down. We won't do a poll. How many people have seen these before? These are the visual art standards for the state of Nevada. I got one thumbs up. That's great. I had never seen these before. And all right, so we got lots of people. This is really encouraging. And so I think what's lost in a lot of work around art is the idea that, in a sense, art, and especially in our elementary classrooms, is reduced to this. It's creating, and it looks a lot like directed draws. And not to say that directed draws don't have a place, but it's Art Hub for kids, and it is I do, you do. And then they end up with 25 pieces of art that, largely speaking, all look the same, depending a little bit on a kid's dexterity. So that doesn't describe all of our art standards. And instead, if you look over here, these are our anchor standards at the top, which include not just creating, which does matter, of course, but also presenting, responding, and connecting. And as an elementary classroom teacher working in Nevada, not only do I have no training on the visual art standards, I don't have the bandwidth or the time to begin developing lessons that are rooted in our anchor standards. And I realized I totally skipped over one important thing, which is I am a 5th grade teacher here in Washoe County School District. I work in a building which is 1/3 free and reduced lunch, 1/3 kind of working class, and 1/3 middle class. About 40% of our students are Hispanic. And then, of course, we're contending with what was alluded to earlier, lots of English learners. So I get many of the challenges, and what I will gloss over also the anxiety and the behavior we're seeing. So back to this, these are our standards. They are in your note taker if you've not seen them before, for your grade level. So if you're curious what the visual art standards look at your grade level. But returning to, if I'm a 5th grade teacher and I know I've listened to David Coleman, he says, bring the arts into my classroom, how do I go about doing it? Because it's not just about, again, creating, it's more than that. It's also these things around presenting, responding, and connecting. And so we're going to look at one way for students to respond. And then again, we're going to unpack this resource, Doodles Academy. So one way for students to respond is with this strategy called the visual thinking strategy, or VTS. And given the fact that people have already said they know what the visual art standards are you familiar with the VTS? You can give me the thumbs up if you've seen that before. All right, sort of ish. And a thumbs up over there. This is great. So again, this was brand new to me. And this is part of a Doodles lesson, which we are not exploring quite yet. But within the visual thinking strategy, students are largely doing 3 things. They are responding to a text. In this case, it's a piece of art, or it could be a photograph, it could be a sculpture. And as they do so, they're focused on these 3 questions down here. What is going on in this picture? What makes you say that? And what else can you find? So those are the 3 questions that they're going to ask. And one way of, again, being really sensitive to the fact that elementary school teachers are completely drowning right now in how much they're being asked to do. How do we make things as easy for them as possible, insofar as how do we find vetted curricular resources that are easily accessible, that they can plop into their classroom, and again, highlight not just the visual art standards, but also get to our literacy standards. So the VTS has students asking what's going on in this picture, what makes them say that, and what else can you find? In a moment, we're going to watch my students do this, and it's a little bit of a twist with them leading the discussion. But we asked the 3 questions. Sorry, so something. Oh, look, somebody said I've used VTS. My students love it. That's great. So within VTS, our first question is what's going on in this picture, which is very different than asking them what do you see. And just take a moment to gloss through those bullets right there of why we might ask what's going on in this picture instead of what do you see. And again, the reason I started with Coleman is because so much of our literacy experiences in K-5 right now largely are about literal questions. And here, when we put text in front of their kids, we want to nurture this disposition that an author, a well-crafted text, is more than literally what's happening, but there's something underneath it. There's something to discover. Those of you who know NVACS work. So actually, I'll return to that in just a moment. But first question students will ask when they're looking at something is what's going on in this picture. Then they're asked, what makes you say that? So it holds them a little bit more accountable than just an observation. There's more going on. So go ahead and read through those bullets of why you might say what makes you say that rather than why do you say that? And what I would highlight here is that first bullet in which students are encouraged to gather evidence to support their opinions, keeping in mind that the way the standards in literacy were crafted is it always begins with standard 10, a complex text. And in this case, if we're using visual thinking, we're thinking about a piece of art or a photograph that is worthy of our time to spend careful consideration of. And if we always start with standard 10, we should always also be framing that with standard 1. And then the rest of the standards in literacy sort of fit in between standards 2 through 9. So standard 10 is complex text, and standard 1 is evidence. So in the same thing that we're looking for in our literacy standards, we're seeing this nurtured as part of VTS. We're going to put a piece of art that's worth looking at in front of them, standard 10, and then we're going to encourage them to find evidence to support opinions, which is standard 1 in literacy, but also that anchor standard within our visual art standards. And our last question is, what else can you find? So go ahead and take a look at those bullets. And then the bullet I want to highlight here is the third one, which makes the point that there usually is more to be seen and talked about than the first students first think. And those are the types of texts that we want to be putting in front of kids, not again just in art, but also when we're talking about literacy, which is there should be some subtext there. There should be something in which there's enough writer's craft that there is literally what's happening, and then there's something below it. So again, going back to our ELA standards, we know that standards 1 is about evidence, standard 10 is about that complex text. Standards 2 and 3 are really about what does the text say. Standards 4, 5, 6 is how does the author say it. And then standards 7, 8, 9 are about what does it mean. And frequently we gloss right over what does it mean. And then I guess what I was going to bring up, which is if you're familiar with the text Where the Wild Things Are by Sednek, it took him, he claims, about 2.5 years to write that, even though there's fewer than 100 words in the entire book. And what he was trying to capture was like literally, obviously, there's the story of where the wild things are, but the subtext was he was trying to capture a tantrum and supposed to feel like a child where, you know, over weeks and over days, right, in the moment of a tantrum just feels like it lasts forever. And that's what he was trying to capture. So it's not just what the story itself is, but also there's something underneath it. So there's usually more to be seen than we first see. So that's the VTS in a nutshell, which is asking 3 questions of a piece of art, photograph, sculpture, et cetera, an installation. And then what we want to do is, or what I want to do for you is 2 things. 1, show you a resource in which this is just plug and play. It's really simple to get to. It's developed by the New York Times, and it's called What's Going On in This Picture. So each week within the New York Times, what they do is they post a photograph without a caption. And then what they want students to do is, so you'll post this in front of their kids, and then throughout the week, they encourage classroom teachers to have their kids engage in the VTS around the photograph, and then there's a big reveal on Friday. So this was the one that was posted at the beginning of this week. If I go down to October 3rd here, this would be the conversation that the kids are having around this photograph. So what is going on in this picture? What makes you say that? What else do you see? So they have that conversation. And then as I scroll down, there is the reveal here in which you actually learn what exactly is happening in this picture. So that's one way of getting there. And what I want to do now again is I want to show you my students using this New York Times resource. But my little twist was, instead of me facilitating everything, I just outsourced it to them so I can go get coffee. I think that's kind of bottom line. All right. And I see a couple of you online. So if you can, oops, I shared the wrong screen. I'm just going to do a thumbs up to make sure you can see or hear the video when I play it.
What is going on in this picture? Miranda.
I noticed that the kids are trying to hold up something really heavy because you can tell by the face of the girl, she looks like she's struggling.
Okay. Owen, what do you see?
I noticed this might be in Africa where there's not much water and they could have dug a hole trying to find water really deep, like kind of a well.
What makes you say that?
What makes me say that is because it looks really dry and there's buckets of water.
Taya, what do you see?
Adding on to what Owen just said, I think they're getting water because the goats and animals are getting water, and it kind of looks like there's like a little water places.
Stella.
It looks like they're trying to like lift the water up into the well or whatever that is, and then it like goes down the sides so the animals can drink it, so they don't like
What makes you
run
say
out of
that?
water. Because it looks like they're trying to like get the water up, and like it really looks like that the water like it's not in the picture, but it looks like it's kind of connected to that.
Abraham.
It looks like it's in a field because there is a lot of hay spread out around there because it just looks like it.
Nevaeh.
It looks like they're trying to dig up something or like grab the water from like that little thing over there.
Because.
I say that because they're like bending down and trying to like, it looks like they're trying to grab something because they're bending down and stuff.
Kendall.
It looks like somewhere in like Africa where they have to like use a well to get water.
Jackson.
Adding on to what Kendall said to make it like a well, I think that well is getting drained from the water. They're taking water out of it because you can look at, there's like a little pipe right there.
Caleb.
Adding on to Miranda, I think this is really heavy because it basically takes 2 kids to carry the one pot. And same with Miranda, the facial expression on her looks like it's really, really heavy.
Rory.
It kind of looks like when there's tornadoes and then people go down in a hole and like cover up so like nothing happens to them. That's what I think it is.
Campbell.
It kind of looks like they're getting water for their farm and they bring from their cars, and then they're going to take this back to their farm because it looks like they have a giant bucket of water, and there's some cows right there.
Jacob.
I think like they might be trying to like get like the animals into like a car because this kind of looks like the edge of like a bed of a truck, and then they attach the ramp to it.
All right, really nicely done. Thank you, Piper. Really impressive how you anchored everything that you discussed.
and what evidence you could retrieve from here. And if you're curious, here's our big reveal. So this was a caption from the New York Times, and this was a reminder in 2021. The story is about a huge undertaking in India to provide clean tap water to all of its roughly 192 million households across 600,000 villages in 2024. The photograph depicts girls filling water using a hand pump in Imladal, India, a village that does not have access to tap water. And then, of course, so you understood the importance of they couldn't just find water in their home. Instead, they had to find a way of retrieving water and then bringing it back to their family. So nicely done.
All right. So that is the visual thinking strategy in action, and that's using that resource for the New York Times. So that if you just wanted to, again, get to another outcome within the visual art standards within Nevada, here's a way for kids to be responding. But that doesn't bring everything together. Instead, that is just, again, that's part of our standards. And incidentally, this is the member of the presentation is available to you, which I'll put in the chat field if you want to listen to the New York Times describe the resource. And here's that link to the resource. And so if we know that we have a strategy for responding to what within the anchor standards, and then of course we know that creating and producing is important, how do we get it all together? So this is Doodles Academy. This is also linked within the note taker, and that's what the big N is here for. With only a handful of you here, are people familiar with Doodles Academy? All right, perfect. So this is free. So I will walk you through this two different ways. I'm going to go online in a moment, but these are within the PowerPoint presentation so that you can keep track of the steps that we're about to follow. So you create a login right here. It's free. In Washoe County, I can tell you it will go to spam. So you need to know that's going to have to be released. If you use a Gmail account, that's another way of doing it. Then there's what's called the project library. Oh yeah, looking at the chat field. Sorry, I'll go back to the question in the chat field in just a moment. But we're going to click on project library, and this is going to bring up our grade level range and then the type of things we might want to work with our students. And then the lessons themselves, once you've selected on something, they all follow the same format. You'll click on the resource, you'll hit enroll, and then you'll have to, and this is just a cautionary thing, this is why this is here. You have to hit get started in order to start a project, and then when you finish a lesson, you have to mark complete. This one doesn't make any sense until you hit a problem. So this is just a cautionary, keep track of this slide if you choose to use the resource about how to get started and making sure you're hitting lessons to mark complete after you finish a lesson with your students. So the lesson that we're going to unpack is called Superheroes. There's always an overview of what you're trying to do with your students. So we are doing within the literacy standards, we're thinking about backstories, we're thinking about superhero, which is a great way of getting to etymology and word study if you're in the intermediate grades, but they're going to be designing and drawing their own superheroes. But again, they're going to be learning a series of art techniques along the way to help them with that. So every project within Doodles Academy is broken out into at least 5 lessons. And so there's always a scope and sequence, and those lessons themselves always follow a very familiar pattern. So just to, so I'm not going too quickly with you. We started at finding a project. We enrolled in a project that looked appealing to us, and we'll show you this online in just a moment. Then we remember to get started, and then we look at a series of lessons that's going to get to our superhero that the kids are going to be drawing, and they're also going to be painting. There's always a materials list for you to be helpful, and if you're curious how it maps onto the national art standards from which the Nevada academic content standards are based, and similarly, how does it map onto the Common Core on which the Nevada academic content standards are based? Here's that. So if you got the administrator who makes you put that into a lesson plan book, there it's done. And then here's the lesson breakdown. The lesson breakdown always starts with an inspirational image. How do we break down an inspirational image? You just saw it using a VTS. There's a video here. The video is for people like me. I am not an art teacher. I'm a gen ed teacher. I graduated from a land-grant university in Montana. There was no emphasis on the arts, I promise you. So there is a video in which they're going to demonstrate whatever technique or outcome they're trying to get to. So it puts the lift off the teacher. It's been curated. I just get to be the facilitator. There's work time, predictably, we know what that is. And then there's presentation, which is also part of the visual arts standards in Nevada, which is where kids are sharing and they're going through the aesthetic and what they ultimately put together. So we find a project. Projects are broken up into 5 lessons. 5 lessons always follow the same pattern. And then these are the pieces of art with the project that we're about to go through in which we can employ the visual thinking strategy. So I'm going to exit out of here and I'm going to go online. I'm going to show you the same stuff again, but this time we're going to pause a couple of times to look at some of the video. So I am right here in Doodles Academy. I've logged in. When I click on Project Library, yours will be blank. Mine has been populated because I've been working with it. But remember, there's a way of searching for specific projects, but these are all the projects. And you start looking through them, the secret language of objects. Here's that superhero lesson that we're going to be going through. If you know your 4th grade standards in Nevada, you got to know symbols. So what a great way of getting to our social studies standards as well as our visual arts standards. Near and far is about perspective taking, which is in our 3rd grade standards. Enchanted lands, where we get into fairy tales and folk tales, which carries through K-5 for us. So there's a lot of stuff that really does a nice job of mapping on. So it's not instead of, it just creates a much richer experience for our kids. So I'm going to click on our superhero project here, which I've already done over here. And then I get to choose, am I an intermediate grade teacher or a primary grade teacher? I'm 5th grade, so I'm going to show you what this looks like. So as I promised, remember, it starts with a project overview. And then this front matter here is what I just showed you, how the lessons break down, the materials. And then here's where I normally would say start or enroll in my course. I'm continuing instead of enrolling, but that's the part that a lot of teachers miss, and then they grow frustrated with the platform. Incidentally, I don't work for Doodles Academy. I just found it. It's free. It works well with our standards. So I'm going to skip the first lesson that says creating a backstory, because I really want to show you, especially since several people in here clearly are spending a lot of time with our art standards, I want to show you drawing a silhouette. So this is the 2nd lesson in the sequence. And we're going to learn, by the way, this is in the note taker, all the resources, the sheets right here, that's in the note taker if you're curious what they're using. So I'm going to show you how Tempest New Collins at Doodles Academy teaches how kids draw silhouettes. And then as you as a classroom teacher, the lift is not on you. You get to show the video. I keep saying you, it's me. It's really me, because I, again, was not trained in the art standards. Can you guys hear that sound? Okay.
Today we're going to start making our superheroes. We're going to make them in the style of the covers of old comic book magazines. Notice in the books how the character is always doing something. They're flying or fighting or running. Also notice how large the figure is on the page. Your eye goes straight to the character. Today we're going to start planning out our cover, and we're going to do that by making the silhouette of our superhero. A silhouette just means it's the outline of our superhero without any of the details inside. So first you're going to get this packet that has a whole bunch of different superhero body parts on it. You're going to choose an arm pose and a leg pose, and you're going to put them together to create your own unique superhero. Now think back to those superhero covers that we saw, and we noticed that the superheroes were really large and would take up most of the cover. Your superhero should be large too. So you want to kind of envision where your arms and legs are going to go, and maybe even make some really light circles, kind of mapping out where on the paper the arms and the legs and the superhero's body is going to fit, to make sure that it's nice and large. Once you have that, you can start drawing your superhero. So what you're going to need to do to draw your superhero is to look closely at the packet, at the arm pose that you chose, and find just its basic lines and draw those. Now what experienced artists do is they automatically block out all parts of their drawing that they're not actually drawing, so it doesn't confuse them. But that's kind of hard when you're starting to draw, so there's a trick you can do. You can get blank paper, and you can cover up the parts of the drawing that you don't want to copy right now. So you might have been a little bit overwhelmed to draw that entire arm, but if you cover up all the parts of the arm except for one basic line, you can just take it line by line. So I've covered up everything except that one basic line, and now I'm pretty confident that I can draw that one line. So all I'm doing is I'm looking at that one line and I'm copying it onto my paper. When I'm ready and I feel like I've accurately copied that one line, I can shift my paper around and I can move it to a new line.
So that's kind of how we would launch, or that's the second lesson in there. The first lesson is how they do some idea generating on what superhero they might draw. And then the second part of that is now we're going to draw our silhouette. So now we are creating right now and we are producing, but we're not going to end up with all the same stuff given all the options we have in terms of how we're going to draw this. What I want to do then is skip to kind of the end of this lesson. And then if we have time, I can show you sort of a take on the primary. We're actually moving really quickly because I think one, fewer participants, but also no breakout rooms. So this was lesson 2, drawing a silhouette. Then we add details, and then we're going to learn how we can finish with watercolors. So this is our 5th lesson. And again, what I want to call attention to is how you as a classroom teacher, or if you're working with teachers, how the lift has been kind of put on the video, and then we get to facilitate.
So today we're going to work on completing our superheroes with watercolor paint. Before you begin, there's a couple different techniques that you should be aware of as you're painting. The first is when you use wet paint on dry paper. That means that you're getting your brush nice and wet, lots of water on it. You're dipping it in your paint and you're getting it filled with a lot of watery paint, and then you're painting on your paper. The edges will stay crisp and the color will stay in one spot and not move around too much. The next technique is when you use wet paint on wet paper. That means before you put any paint down, you're going to dip your brush in water and you're going to put water on your paper first. Then you're going to put the paint on top of that already wet paper. Your paint is going to kind of fuzz out and the edges are not going to be very crisp. If you put more than one color down, the two colors will kind of mix together and they'll make a new color. Next we have some basics. To make a thin line, get a lot of watery paint on your brush and barely touch your brush to the paper. To make a thick line, simply press harder. If you want to spread that color around, all you have to do is fill your brush with water and paint against the line. The paint will fan into the water. So I'm painting with water, not with more paint right now. Now, if you make a mistake or you put color down where you didn't actually mean there to be color, you can sort of get rid of it by blotting it with a moist paper towel. This is not going to completely get rid of the color, but it will lift it enough that you can paint over it with a different color. So finally, if you want to keep your colors crisp and separate, you want to wait until the first paint dries and then paint next to it. So you're basically painting on dry paper. All right, so let's see these techniques in action. So here's my superhero. I'm first going to create a damp background. So I'm just using water and I'm making the paper wet. Then I'm dotting my colors down so that they spread really easily. And I'm using a lot of different colors, but I'm using all warm colors. So reds and yellows and browns so that they all go together. Then I'm going to start putting down my first layer on my superhero. Now this is not the color I'm going to have eventually, but I want to let different pieces dry so I can go back and I can keep my colors crisp. So this is just my first layer. I know that I wanted my dress to kind of mix together, so I'm adding some black into that blue before it dries so it mixes. I'm starting to go back in and I'm adding color only after the first color that I put down is dry. I'm adding extra coats on top to change the way that the color looks.
All right. That's right there. See, a couple of things popped up in the chat field of attendance tracker. All right. So before I let you off, a couple of things. I won't torture you with another video, but be aware that there are primary versions of this. And so there's some heavy scaffolding into how they make their superhero in the first place and how they add details and how they go about painting. So I know that some of you, if you're thinking about, are they just going to have the fine motor skills to start making a silhouette? Probably not, but there is a very strong scaffold to support them with that. There we go, play from current. These incidentally, remember I mentioned this, it always starts with, our lessons always start with an inspirational image. So that's what these are. So using that VTS as a vehicle to get there. And then I shared that there are two versions. So there's a primary version, and then you saw the intermediate version that I played. And then, of course, we saw the video about how to actually use some of the techniques again, so that the kids are actually learning, not a directed draw. We've created an experience that's much richer for them that they can generalize and then use in other places. So this is what my kids at the beginning of this school year, this is what their first project, this is what superheroes look like for them. And part of the point that I would try to emphasize here is there's a similarity, of course, because we worked from the same platform, but there's enough difference and variation. It's not a directed draw. This was the superhero project. The other one that is up here, so I've done two this year. This is the Enchanted Lands piece where they learn about foreground, middle ground, and background, and then they learn about adding some details. And for whatever reason, this is a cohort of kids that all wanted to add magazine images rather than painting something. So be aware that, excuse me, not be aware, but this is, again, the Doodles Academy piece. And my goals were to let you know a little bit more about the Nevada academic content standards, unpack this visual thinking strategy, and then, of course, learn about Doodles Academy. All the resources that I curate and create, and then other student examples are all just to teachers. So I do more stuff, obviously, in ELA math than art. But if you're curious what other things might look like, you're welcome to visit this site. And with that, I will pause. And then if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those. And if there aren't, I guess you get to fill out a survey and an attendance tracker.
Yeah, we have this session until 10:15, so you have time to answer questions or go a little more in depth. I love that. I'm a technology teacher, but I totally see ways I can use that because I'm K-5. I love the questions. You know, as teachers, we're always like, how do I ask the juiciest questions? So I think those questions can be applied to so many different things within that visual teaching strategy. And that project looked like so much fun, making the superheroes. Now I'm trying to think, okay, how can I do that, but have them do it on technology, right? Create their drawing. So that was cool.
Thank you.
I appreciated you showing us the Doodles Academy. And yes, I've been hesitant to join it because it always says 1 through whatever, and I'm kindergarten. But oh my gosh, showing me how to paint. Well, right there, and I love how the video said pause. That was Yeah, because I'd want to try it. So thank you so much.
You are welcome.
And also the asking the questions, that series of questions, I learned about that during the quarantine. I took an art class because, you know, trying to teach art to kindergarten via Chromebook. So the art community was emphasizing on art appreciation. I'm sorry about all the background noise,
You're
but
totally good.
anyways, that's where all those questions, I got familiar with them. So thank you.
Thank you.
I definitely think it could just generate such rich discussion. And I don't know if you guys notice the same thing, but just the students after the pandemic and just everything, they just social skills, being able to talk to each other. This would be just a nice topic that they could kind of get around and talk about and non-threatening, right? You don't have to have a right answer, right? What you see, what you feel, as long as you can support it with your evidence, like it's there.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I was sitting here thinking, just watching, thinking, and I'm like, with the superhero thing, I went like a totally different way. I'm thinking, what a great way to teach character traits. You can hold up different books, use VTS, and just say, well, what kind of traits can we predict? What do we think this character might be like in the story? So I'm like writing all these notes frantically going, wait, this is great because I'm going to do a closed read, you know, after this next week, obviously. And yeah, so thank you, because now I have this whole other thing to add to my lesson, but I forgot how much that helps bring out so many things. So I really appreciate you sharing that, bringing that back to my head, because I used it a lot before.
Mhm.
And then, you know, COVID happened and
Right.
all of our brains went to mush as well.
And by the way, remember we did a lot of yada, yada, yada there, which was lesson 1 is exactly what you're describing, which is character traits, and then thinking about how artists have done things on comic book covers in a very deliberate, very specific way. And then of course, lesson 2 is drawing the silhouette. Lesson 3 is adding the details. And then from there, then we paint the object. So, all right.
And I see a total writing assignment, you know, a writing project after that, write the
Mhm.
story of your superhero or whatever. I'm gonna stop the recording just so we're good.
Okay.